Hello and welcome back. I'm Valerie Monroe and I am Bookwormy. And it's a beautiful day outside today. So we decided to sit outside and read down the swale out here. We are actually on the wooden steps. And if this book were true and not a fantasy, you know who would be living under those steps. Brogden and Aunt Hazel and Aunt Gladys too. That's right. And directly beneath us is the swale. There's not a lot of water in it today. In the chapter that we just read yesterday, that's right, Brogden had decided that he was going to go and try to save Maggie from these two hunters, Mackie, and Simp, who are in the brown house. You're going to show them the brown house? I am. Now let's see if we can do this correctly and carefully so no one falls down the steps. Okay. Here's my house. I don't know if you can see it. Up there it is. That is the inspiration for the house that Mackie and Simp were in when Brogden heard them. Remember, he could hear them through the windows, and he found out what their plan was. They're going to try to capture Maggie and sell her to maybe a laboratory. Who knows? So let's see. Oh, and at the end, when he goes to rescue her, he made that raft, and he was going to go back down the swale. Do you remember at the end of that chapter who jumped on the raft? Can you remember? It was Aunt Gladys and Aunt Hazel. That's just crazy. Yeah, so now there's three of them going down the swale on a raft. Let's continue. Although the second ride down the swale was a rough one, the raft proved quite seaworthy, and there was plenty of room on it for all three of them. The two women held on tight as it traveled along, and Brogden took the job of steering it with an oar that he had fashioned from a stick. He used it to shove off each time they bumped into the sides of the swale. Thankfully, the current was nowhere near as ferocious as it had been during Brogden's first journey, so the ride was fairly pleasant. Oh, look, dear, Aunt Hazel pointed out beautiful flowers and plants as they sailed by. This is splendid. Great fun, she exclaimed. Sister, do please hold on, cautioned Aunt Gladys, whose face had turned as white as a ghost. Brogden didn't dare speak the worries that were nagging at him as they moved along in the stream. What if they were moving too quickly when they reached the bottom of the swale? What if they couldn't stop when they reached the drain pipe? What if they just flew out into the lake? They would drown, and it would be all his fault. Sensational, cried Aunt Hazel. Hold on, insisted Aunt Gladys. We should have done this years ago, whooped Aunt Hazel. Hold on, pleaded Aunt Gladys. Whee, squealed Aunt Hazel. Sister, please, Aunt Gladys scolded. Oh, look, dear, up ahead. Aunt Hazel pointed to a round opening ahead of them. A tunnel. But it wasn't a tunnel at all. It was the drain pipe. And as they entered its darkness, the raft showed no sign of slowing down. On the contrary, it was gaining momentum as it neared the exit. Brogden saw the circle of light at the other end and made a decision. With just inches to spare, he grabbed hold of both of his aunt's hands and yanked them off of the raft, which continued sailing along and out of the pipe. They heard a splash as it dropped into the lake below. Wow, what a thrill, Aunt Hazel declared, leaning against the side of the pipe. Aunt Gladys had landed on her bum and was soaked. She stood up and sloshed her way through the water to the pipe's opening. She stared wide-eyed at the raft, which was floating away in Lake Wahakmo. Now what? She demanded. Now that we are somewhat solidly standing, I must say, sister, that one of us should have remained at home. I should have been consulted before you hastily grabbed my hand and pulled me with you into the swale. But, dear, look at Brogden, replied Aunt Hazel. She cupped his chin in her hands and stared into his eyes. I couldn't bear to let him go again, alone, to not know where he was or if he'd ever come back to us. She paused and then winked at Brogden. And, sister, we've never gone on a vacation. It's time we see the world beyond our home. Oh, humph! Snorted Aunt Gladys. Brogden eyed the water below the drain pipe. This time there was no frisbee. Scanning the horizon, he did spy 2 ducks flying in the distance. From far away, they looked just like Fred and Nancy. He squinted harder and then let out a whoop of glee. Fred! Nancy! He shouted through cupped hands. Help! Help! The birds continued in their flight, oblivious to his calls. He tried again, louder, and Aunt Hazel joined in. Yoo-hoo! She cried, Fred! Nancy! Over here! This way! Aunt Gladys stood resolute with her arms folded. Oh, silliest thing I've ever heard of, asking ducks for assistance, she muttered. What we need is an action plan. She put her hand to her forehead as if to gather her thoughts. A length of rope and... Ah! She screamed. A water beetle had attached itself to her forehead. Ah! Help me, she wailed. Help me. Aunt Hazel reached out and deftly plucked the insect away. She held it up to the light of the drain pipe opening and examined it. Oh, calm down, sister. It's just a whirligig. Order Colopetera. Family Gurnidae. Note its feelers, its divided eyes, its paddle-like hind legs, and its apple-like scent. She tossed it out of the drain pipe into the lake, where it spun away on the surface of the water. Most importantly, it's not poisonous at all. Oh, my nerves, Aunt Hazel murmured away. I must sit down a moment. In the midst of the commotion with the whirligig, no one had noticed that 2 ducks were hovering in front of the drain pipe. Did someone call for help? One of them asked. They turned to see where the voice came from. Fred! Nancy! Brogden exclaimed. Brogden? Fred was clearly puzzled at seeing him. Whatever are you doing here? Again. Oh, it's a long story, said Brogden, but we haven't much time to explain. We must get to Sunset Island. It's out in the middle of the lake. Can you give us a float over? I know it's quite far, he said. First things first, said Nancy. Who are these lovely ladies? Brogden quickly made the introductions, and each of the women shook Fred and Nancy's webbed feet as they continued hovering. Oh, curious. So delightfully curious, said Aunt Hazel. A pleasure, madams. Fred crooned and bowed his handsome green head before them. With the formalities out of the way, Brogden waited for the ducks to respond to his request. They whispered and quacked, their heads close together as they discussed it. And finally, Fred spoke up. It's not that we don't want to help you or your charming aunts, he said. You know we'd do anything for you, Nancy chimed in. It's just that, well, Fred had hesitated. Truth is, we haven't been swimming in the water for quite some time now. We've been spending the majority of our time in the air. You see, we've been hearing from the most reliable sources that a ferocious monster with a very long scaly body and snake-like head and possibly maybe hundreds or thousands of pointy teeth is swimming in these waters. He motioned to the lake with his wing. It's not safe, cried Nancy. All of the lake creatures have been avoiding the water for weeks, except the poor fish, of course, who have no choice but to stay there. But all of the amphibians have taken to the land and the birds to the air. Brogden cut her off. It's not true. Maggie isn't a monster. She looks fierce, but she's no danger to anyone. Fred eyed Brogden curiously. And you know this how? He asked. Because I've met her, Brogden sputtered. You what? Fred and Nancy cried. You what? Aunt Hazel echoed. They all turned to Aunt Gladys, expecting her to repeat the question as well, but no such comment came from her. She had fainted dead away. And that's where we'll stop for today. I guess hearing about a monster in the lake and that Brogden already knew about it was just too much for Aunt Gladys, and she has just fainted away. Well, hopefully we'll see you tomorrow, and we can find out if Fred and Nancy believe Brogden and if they agree to take him back to Sunset Island, where he can hopefully rescue Maggie. Well, I hope you're enjoying the story. I hope you're doing a lot of reading on your own as well. And thank you for joining us on this beautiful day. Please come back tomorrow and read with us some more. I hope it's nice tomorrow because it's nice to be outside. You know what I say? Any place is a great place to read. Have a wonderful day.